Good evening. That text that we just had read for us, I'm going to put on the screen, and I want you to notice something that I noticed when I read it. I know the font is kind of small, but if you can see, I've got justice in red 3 times in that passage. When we look at this passage, we see a prophecy from Isaiah. And I want to start off, I guess, by asking this question: what does it mean to bring forth justice? What does it mean to establish justice? Because that seems to be something that is made a pretty big deal in this passage. When we look at the idea of justice in the Scriptures, it has to do with righteousness, with fairness. So to establish justice is to establish righteousness, to establish fairness. And it has this idea of establishing a system that is right and fair, a system to where the good are rewarded and the evil are punished. This is the idea of justice. And God's servant in this passage, the chosen one, it's referring to the kingdom of Israel. As Isaiah is speaking, he's talking. You go and you read the greater context of what's going on here, and he's talking about Israel in Israel's perfect form, in Israel's ideal form. What we would see with Israel is if they obeyed God's law, if they were faithful, then what would happen is justice would be established in Israel, but then also justice would be established throughout the world. The world would come to know God, to fear God, to love God and obey God, and there would be justice throughout the world. When you go all the way back to Abraham and you trace what it was that he was meant to be and what his lineage was to bring about, to bless the entire world, this was the idea, that all the world would know and obey the God that Abraham knew and obeyed, and justice would be established. But Israel failed. Israel failed in that purpose, and they hoped for someone to come along, a king to come along from the lineage of David, who would be God's true servant, God's true chosen one. A king that would come along and lead the nation of Israel to where they need to be, and he would establish justice both in Israel and throughout the world. And when we take that passage and we trace it through Scripture, we actually find it quoted in Matthew. When you go to Matthew chapter 12, verses 18 through 21, this passage from Isaiah is quoted as a prophecy that's being fulfilled by Jesus. He was, he is, and he will be bringing justice to the world. He is establishing righteousness and fairness. When Jesus came to establish his kingdom, he came establishing a system that is going to not only change Israel, but change the world. It's going to bring about worldwide righteousness and fairness. This was the duty of the anointed king of God. What we're looking at tonight is 1 Kings, and in chapter 2. We're going to be focused on chapter 2. And in this chapter, the royal descendant of David is going to be taking the throne, and he's going to begin his reign by establishing justice. In fact, this is what this entire chapter is about the messianic descendant of David establishing justice in Israel. And what we see in this chapter is a foreshadowing of what the true messianic descendant of David is going to do when he returns to establish everlasting worldwide justice. All there will be is righteousness and fairness when Jesus returns. Now, last week, to give just a quick little recap, last week we saw David in his very old and frail age. He is getting ready to die. And his oldest living son, Adonijah, sees his state and decides, okay, it's time for me to go ahead and take the throne. I'm going to go ahead and take my rightful place as king over Israel. But this was stopped by the anointing of Solomon. And when Adonijah begged Solomon for mercy, Solomon gave him mercy and spared his life. That leads us right up to our text. Let's look at verses 1 through 4 to start off. As David's time to die drew near, he charged Solomon his son, saying, I am going the way of all the earth. Be strong, therefore, and show yourself a man. Keep the charge of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, his commandments, his ordinances, and his testimonies, according to what is written in the law of Moses, that you may succeed in all that you do and wherever you turn, so that the Lord may carry out his promise which he spoke concerning me, saying, if your sons are careful of their way, to walk before me in truth, with all their heart and with all their soul, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel. So David, he's about to die. He's about to die, and he has some wise advice for his successor, for Solomon. And what he tells him is, as God's anointed king, be strong. Be strong, be brave, and obey God. That's good advice, isn't it? For a king, for a man who's to lead a nation of people, not just politically, but religiously, spiritually. That's what the king of Israel was meant to be. More than just a political leader making political decisions. He was meant to be their spiritual leader. What he tells him, be strong, be brave, and obey God. And he even tells him why you should do this. One, because if you do this, our lineage will continue to occupy the throne. And that's what any family would want. But then second, do this because if you do, you will succeed in everything that you do. You will succeed in everything that you do. And this lays out a very important principle that is still the truth today. And it's this: God's laws are for our good. God's laws are for our benefit. Here's the thing, and this is just the simple truth. Obeying God will lead to a happier life. Obeying God will lead to a more successful life. Obeying God will lead to a just overall better life. Now, some people, when they hear that, they say, oh, well, you're talking about health and wealth gospel. That's all that is. Is obeying God's going to make your life better. You're just like those that you see on TV that talk about, if you'll do this, then God's going to bless your life immeasurably and things are going to go well for you. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is just absolute truth. Obeying God will give you a happier life, a more successful life, and a better life. Obeying God does not guarantee you that you're going to have great health for the rest of your life. It doesn't guarantee you're going to live to be 100 years old. Obeying God doesn't guarantee you popularity or fame or lots of friends. Obeying God does not guarantee you great wealth, fortune, or a life of ease. But here's the thing. None of those things constitute a happier life. None of those things constitute a successful life. None of those things constitutes a better life. That's the way we're taught. That's the way the world teaches us, is that if you have lots of friends, have lots of money, and have good health, well, then you've got it all. That's not true. None of those things are going to make you happy. None of those things mean that you're successful. And none of those things mean that you are having a great life. The thing is, a happy life is a life of contentment. A happy life is a life of satisfaction regardless of how much you have. A successful life is a life of doing your best. and being good at what you do, regardless of if it brings you fame or fortune. A better life is a life that is without sorrow, without grief, without drama, without regret, without pain, that is produced and brought about by the sin in life. That is the better life. And so, it is just a simple and absolute fact that if you obey God, you're going to be happier, you're going to be successful, and you're going to have a better life. That's just how it is. And if Solomon, as the spiritual leader and political leader of Israel, will obey God, then not only will he have a happy, successful, and better life, but so will all of the people who submit to his reign and rule. They will have happier, successful, better lives. This was David's wise order to King Solomon. But he's not done yet. He's still got more to say. In the establishment of Solomon's reign, his kingdom, there also needs to be this establishment of justice. And here's what David has to say next. Verse 5. And there is something else. You know what Joab, son of Zeruiah, did to me when he murdered my 2 army commanders, Abner, son of Ner, and Amasa, son of Jether. He pretended that it was an act of war, but it was done in a time of peace, staining his belt and sandals with innocent blood. Do with him what you think best, but don't let him grow old and go to his grave in peace. If you remember who Joab is, we read about him last week. So he was David's commander, also David's nephew. And when Adonijah decided to take the throne, or at least try to take the throne, Joab joined him. He joined him in his royal procession through the streets. He joined him in his banquet. Here's the thing about Joab. When you go back to the book of Solomon and see all the things that Joab did, Joab was not a good man. He was not a good man. He assassinated 2 commanders of Israel without David's consent, without David's wanting him to do so. It was mostly out of selfishness, out of wanting to do this for himself. And so now David wants Solomon to establish justice. But the thing is, justice is not just a negative thing. It's not just punishing the evil, but it's also rewarding those who are good. And we see that in the next thing that David says. Verse 7, be kind to the sons of Barzillai, of Gilead. Make them permanent guests at your table, for they took care of me when I fled from your brother Absalom. So Barzillai. Establish justice for Barzillai too, because this was a man, if you go back and read about him, he was 80 years old. And he was taking care of David whenever he could in the wilderness. And what David wants is for justice to be done for this man's descendants. Take care of them. I want you to make sure they have a place at your table. The thing is, in the Messianic kingdom, kindness and care is rewarded with kindness and care. And that's what David is asking of Solomon here. And he goes on and says more. And remember Shimei, son of Gera, the man of Bahurim in Benjamin. He cursed me with a terrible curse as I was fleeing to Mahanaim. When he came down to meet me at the Jordan River, I swore by the Lord that I would not kill him. But that oath does not make him innocent. You are a wise man, and you will know how to arrange a bloody death for him. The last bit of justice that David orders Solomon to establish is putting Shimei to death. Shimei was not loyal to King David. You can go back and read about that in Samuel. And what he did was he came out, he started cursing and calling down all kinds of terrible things to happen to David, and was even throwing rocks at him. And he didn't like David. He was against the king. And so David, he said, I swore not to kill him, but now that Solomon is king, it seems like it's time for justice. And so he calls for justice. And then we read in verse number 10, "Then David died and was buried with his ancestors in the city of David. David had reigned over Israel for 40 years, 7 of them in Hebron and 33 in Jerusalem. Solomon became king and sat on the throne of David his father, and his kingdom was firmly established." So David's dead, Solomon's now king. And the rest of the chapter is Solomon establishing justice. See, David, he's given him this wise instruction and then tells him to do these certain things to establish justice. And now the rest of the chapter is all about Solomon doing that very thing. Now, you remember from the last chapter, last week, there was a beautiful, young, virgin, warm-bodied girl who was chosen from a pretty distant place, from Shunem, to come and lay with David in his bed to keep him warm. Now, I said last week that we would say more about that situation this week. Now, here's what's going on in chapter 2. Adonijah, you know, the son of David who tried to take the throne, Adonijah now wants to marry this girl. And he wants Solomon's permission to do so. But I want you to notice how he goes about asking for that permission. Verse 13. "One day Adonijah, whose mother was Haggith, came to see Bathsheba, Solomon's mother. 'Have you come with peaceful intentions?' she asked him. 'Yes,' he said, 'I come in peace. In fact, I have a favor to ask of you.' 'What is it?' she asked. He replied, 'As you know, the kingdom was rightfully mine. All Israel wanted me to be the next king. But the tables were turned, and the kingdom went to my brother instead, for that is the way the Lord wanted it.'" Okay, there's some interesting things he says there. Do you remember the condition that Solomon gave Adonijah in order for him to spare him his life? What it was if you prove yourself to be worthy, if you prove yourself to be loyal to the king, you'll have your life. But if you prove yourself to not be loyal, to not be worthy, then you'll die. What we know about Adonijah, and I mentioned this last week, he is a spoiled little pretty boy prince who has never been told no. And that is showing here. Because what he does, he comes to the king's own mother and says, "You know, I should be king. First of all, I'm the older brother. But not even to mention that, all Israel wanted me to be king. All Israel looked to me to be their king, but I guess it's what God wanted for Solomon to be king." He's showing his true colors in the way that he's asking this question. It goes on, "So now, I have just one favor to ask of you. Please don't turn me down." "What is it?" she asked. He replied, "Speak to King Solomon on my behalf, for I know he will do anything you request. Ask him to let me marry Abishag, the girl from Shunem." "All right," Bathsheba replied, "I will speak to the king for you. Here's my request. Ask Solomon if I can marry this girl." And so she does as she said. She goes and she comes to Solomon and she asks Solomon if Adonijah can marry Abishag. And what you read next is Solomon absolutely blowing up. He is just filled with anger. And he tells his own mother, he says, "Why don't you go ahead and ask him if he wants to be king too? Why don't you go ahead and just turn to me and ask me, 'Hey, Solomon, can your brother Adonijah have the throne?'" I can picture Solomon kind of getting up off his throne and saying, "Why don't you just ask me if he can have this and sit here?" You know, because when you think about Adonijah, he's the older brother after all, so in normal situations, he would be king. And not only that, but, you know, when he tried to take the throne, he got the commander and he got the high priest with him. Why don't you just go ahead and ask me if he can be king? He's angry. He's upset. And so what he does next is he gets his new commander, Benaiah. He has Benaiah go and put Adonijah to death. Now, we might, from our cultural and historic context, we'll step back and we'll say, what in the world is going on here? It seems so strange that Solomon would just blow up like this to such a request. He's just wanting to marry this girl. Why are you so mad? Well, you see, the thing about Abishag was she wasn't just seen as this little servant girl who was taking care of the king from time to time. The way it looked, whether this was the case or not, the way it looked was she is now one of his concubines. She is now one of the women of his harem, the women that belonged to him. And to sleep with another man's wife in that culture was to say, I'm the man now. I'm the man in charge now. Adonijah's brother Absalom did the exact same thing when he took the throne from David. He took David's concubines on the roof of the house, and you know what happened next. Solomon knew that this was Adonijah's last-ditch effort to claim the throne. If I can just marry Abishag, this woman who belonged to the king, it's going to look like now, since I have slept with the king's bride, the king's wife, I'm the one in charge now. This proved to Solomon that Adonijah had no intentions of being loyal to him. And so Solomon kept his word. He put him to death. He established justice. Solomon then goes on to have Joab, the old commander, executed as his father David had ordered. And he didn't execute the high priest Abiathar, even though he also joined Adonijah. He dismissed him from office. He was no longer going to be priest. And this fulfilled a prophecy that we read back in 1 Samuel chapter 2. And then Solomon, he turns to Shemaiah to deal out justice to him. And instead of killing him like David wanted, he says, you know what, here's my plan for you. You have to live in Jerusalem for the rest of your life. You cannot take one step outside the city of Jerusalem. If you do, you'll be put to death. And Shemaiah said, all right, sounds good to me. I mean, David wanted to kill me. So if you're just going to say, just live in Jerusalem, you can live in Jerusalem for the rest of your life, and that sounds pretty good. So Shemaiah agreed to all of that. But we read 3 years later, two of Shemaiah's servants ran away, and he went after them and left Jerusalem in order to get them. And so Solomon kept his word, and he had Shemaiah executed. And again, justice is being established in the kingdom of the Messiah, the anointed king. And so this whole chapter is about the king taking the throne and establishing justice. And this story is a vivid foreshadowing of our present and future reality. Because the Messiah is now sitting on the throne. Jesus is on his throne. And there are some that are like Adonijah who have absolutely no respect for the king. They want to be king over their own lives, and they have no loyalty to King Jesus whatsoever. There are some that are like Joab and like Abiathar, who claim to be loyal to the king, but given the opportunity to serve their own interests and their own desires, they jump at that opportunity. And there are some that are like Shemaiah, who were once living in absolute open rebellion to the king, but the king was patient with them. Jesus is patient with them, and they eventually enter into a covenant relationship with him, only to, over time, become lax and indifferent in their promises, in their covenant with Jesus. And they fall away. What we know from the Scriptures is that Jesus is going to return. The Messiah is going to return, and he is going to establish his eternal kingdom with justice. Justice is coming. Justice is coming for those who are not loyal to King Jesus. But justice is also coming for those that are like Barzillai, those who are loyal to the king, those who are faithful to the king, those who do serve the king, even in times of great difficulty. And what we know about these people is that there is a place reserved at the king's table for them. For those who remain loyal to King Jesus, loving him, serving him, obeying him with all of their lives, there is a spot at the eternal table with him. The Messiah's kingdom is a kingdom established on justice. Those who aren't loyal to him are going to be punished with everlasting destruction. And those who are loyal to him, they're going to be rewarded eternally. And like the title of this series, that's why those of us who are loyal to King Jesus, we say, "Kingdom come." Kingdom come. We look forward to when the kingdom comes. We're longing for that day. Don't you look forward to the day when there is absolute justice? When there is absolute fairness. You know, there's a common saying we have in life and about life. It's not fair. You have to tell that to your kids a lot. Because something will happen, maybe a child wants something and you don't allow them to have it, and they say, well, that's not fair, and you often say, life's not fair. But it will be. That's the promise of Jesus. That's the promise of the kingdom, that one day it will be. It will be right. Everything will be right. Everything will be fair. Wickedness will be forever destroyed, taken out of the picture. But righteousness, the good, those that are humble and seek to obey God, there is justice coming, there's righteousness coming, there's good coming, there's reward coming. And we look forward to that day. That is one of our great hopes. That's one of the things that keeps us on that right path, knowing that righteousness and fairness and justice, it's coming. And because I know that, I want to continue to serve him. I want to experience that. I want to experience the kingdom, the reign and the rule over all things with justice and fairness and righteousness. I want to experience that for eternity. But in the meantime, until he returns, what we are called to do is follow in our King's footsteps, and that is to establish justice. You and I are not in the role of all-powerful, totalitarian government leader. We can't just stand up and say, you know what, we're getting rid of all evil. We're going to punish in the most extreme fashion all that is evil, and we're going to reward what is good. It's not where we're at, and it's really not what Jesus called for. But what he wants from us is to establish justice where we are and how we can. To stand up for those that are oppressed. To help those who are in need. To do what we can to stop evil. We are citizens of the kingdom of the Messiah. And because of that, we are people who love justice. And so that tells us, for one, we cannot be people who are causing injustice. But it also tells us that we ought to be people, in whatever way that we possibly can, we ought to be seeking, desiring, and establishing justice. We are meant to make a difference in the world, all for Jesus' glory. And so, as we are awaiting the day when he's going to make all things right, the day when he comes and establishes all-encompassing, everlasting justice, we ought to be working for that now. And so stand up for the little man. Stand up when there's no one else standing up. Help when there's no one else helping. Bring grace and life and love when those things seem to be absent. We live in a dark world, but we are meant to be messengers of light. And so let's go out into our community this week and let's establish justice as we wait for justice to come. If you have any needs at all tonight, if you're not a Christian and you would like to have your sins washed away, be a Christian, have everlasting life and everlasting justice as your fate and your future, Jesus offers that freely. If you will turn from a life of sin, give your life entirely to Jesus, die with him, and be resurrected with him in baptism, then he will save you, and he's coming to reward you. If you are not faithful as a Christian, and you need to fix that, make it tonight. Don't wait another minute, but do something tonight. Ask for prayers tonight. Ask for help tonight. Whatever you need, make sure you don't leave here still needing that. Whatever it is you need, you can see the elders in the back of the room, or come forward as we stand and sing.